Hello, this is Georgina Rose, part-time esoteric content creator and part-time center of pestilence, and welcome back to the Darling YouTube channel. On this channel, we discuss magic, mysticism, religion, the occult, and everything on the fringes of esoterica. And in this video, we're going to be talking about a subject that I'm surprised I haven't covered yet, because I feel like it's something that's important in a lot of systems. It's something that comes up again and again and again across religions and cultures, and that will be talismans. So talismans, if you ever noticed, any occultist, you've ever met a occultist, you've gone to events, or you've been to a metaphysical store, or you've even spent time on the occult internet, you're gonna notice that a lot of occultists wear a lot of jewelry, things like this, rings, all this stuff. Obviously, these little milk cartons are not talismans, but a lot of occultists wear a lot of jewelry, and I think people in the occult community is like, why is everyone wearing this symbolism all the time? Of course it can be to just rep their pride in their tradition and religion, but a lot of the time, it's that the jewelry they're wearing are essentially enchanted. In movies and media, you see a lot of stuff where there are like enchanted rings, enchanted necklaces. But did you know that that was actually based in real occultism and exists in countless traditions? So first, let's talk about what objects even do within the occult. Why do we use objects? Because on this channel, we've talked a lot about ideologies, ideas, philosophies, and systems, but not a lot about the practical side. So let's get into why you would use an object in magic. Because obviously when you're doing magic, you're doing mysticism, you're doing things beyond the material, right? We exist on the material plane, on Malcode, whatever you want to call it. But when we work with magic, we are, reaching above or below and then pulling back here. As I've explained quite a few times, there's this thing called as above, so below. I'm sure you've heard this expression. There's even a campy horror movie named after it. But what that means is that we are in what is known as a microcosm, micro as in small and cosm as in universe. And the microcosm can impact the macrocosm, the big universe, and vice versa. If you've ever looked at astrology, you're going to notice that astrology argues that the movements of the celestial bodies have an impact on the material plane, but this can work in reverse, and that's what a lot of rituals are. Rituals are using the power of your will and your microcosm to affect the macrocosm, and so this relationship is connected through what is known as correspondence, or the way things relate. There's a book called Libra 777 by Aleister Crowley that attempts to sort of basically make a huge map of the entire universe and what everything corresponds to. And so if you understand the correspondence, you can use a correspondence in your microcosm that would match something that it corresponds to in the macrocosm and then create change because they are interrelated, right? So objects, you use the objects as correspondences because you really don't need tools or objects to do rituals or magic or, mysticism. So much mysticism is just internal, it's contemplative, it's saying certain things, it's using language in specific ways, but a lot of it does involve tools. Even, some of the oldest systems involve them. If you look at pretty much any sacred text, you're gonna notice that there are sacred objects within them. And a common type of object used, of course, there are a lot, there are countless objects that ritualists use. But one that you see a lot is these pieces of, wearable items, essentially jewelry. And what they often are talismans. Of course, there are other types of sort of enchanted jewelry or things you wear. And I want to go through those really quickly just so, we know the differences between all the things, because a lot of time they all get kind of thrown into the same category because they are very similar and they do kind of work in a similar way. The first would be a scapular. This is a thing that Catholic and Christian people use, typically as a thing of protection. A scapular that you see commonly is one that says, whoever is wearing this when they die, they will not suffer the eternal fire. So Christians use that one a lot. They're essentially these pieces of string that connect these two little things that look like cards. So that's one of them. This is a little different because this is typically for just that one cause, and they are blessed by priest rather than something that lay people, which is most of us, I'm a lay person, can do. And as well, they really are specifically for those paradigms. But similar concepts exist in a lot of other traditions. Another one would be the layman. So layman is something you're going to hear a lot if you're exploring ceremonial magic. And what these laymans are there these little patches, or sometimes they're put on string or rope, that you wear, and they typically have what is known as a sigil on them. I have an entire video on sigils if you're not familiar with the concept of sigils, but a lot of times laymans have sigils of a spirit. So sigils can be multiple things. The sigils that we hear about the most are sort of the chaos magic style of sigils, Although chaos magic is more of a methodology than a practice, but I digress. They're the ones that you think of with chaos magic, right? You write down your intent, you cross things out, and that's your sigil. But there are also sigils for entities that are typically scribed by mystics. So basically a mystic will go, I want a sigil to represent this spirit so that I can work with the spirit effectively. So what they will do is they will commune with that spirit and scry or channel. Scrying is like looking into something and gazing and seeing the symbols pop out. And channeling is conjuring the spirit through you and then letting it speak through something like automatic writing or just talking. And with that, they will get the sigil. So they are both sigils, but the sigils of the entities are just to represent that entity. You see it a lot on, various icons and idols. You see it carved into candles, and they're used to represent that spirit and sort of infuse that spirit into the space. So with a layman, you'll often wear the layman and sort of attach the spirit to you. But since they are like representing an entity, they are a little bit different than what you would use a talisman for. So what is a talisman? Well, a talisman can look a variety of ways because it's a pretty common concept. It exists in a lot of cultures and traditions, but typically what they are is they're a piece of jewelry or, a pen or even a ring, something like that. There's something that you can put on yourself, and they will typically represent an intention or a goal or something like that. The most famous talismans are probably the Pentacles of Solomon. So the Keys of Solomon is one of the most famous grimoires ever. I mean, it's one of the biggest. And within it, in what is known as the Greater Key, though a lot of people pay more attention to the Lesser Key, because if you don't know, the Keys of Solomon are actually multiple keys plural. There is a list of pentacles, and they're pentacles for every planetary body, the moon, the sun, Mars, Venus, etc. There's a set of pentacles for them, and each of these pentacles represent a specific thing to, use from those things. So all the pentacles represent various dignities and virtues of the planet they correspond to, but they have different specific meanings. There's one for protection, there's one for invisibility, there's one for success, there's ones for love, there's everything. And interestingly, just a little aside, Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet, the Mormon guy, actually died with a pentacle of Jupiter in his pocket, which I just think is really cool as an aside. People have a lot of thoughts about Mormonism, but there is an esoteric dimension to it, so I'm just going to put that there. Make up your own decision on Mormonism. That's a complicated topic, but I thought that'd be cool to just drop in there. But these pentacles, a lot of people wear them. But the symbol on their own is not ready to be used, right? So you have your talisman. Your talisman could have sigils on it. Your talisman could be a more classic thing. There's talismans within, I know, the Kabbalistic tradition. They're in a lot of traditions. Also, if you're a Norse pagan, there's this thing called bind runes. So within Norse paganism, a key concept is the runes, and the runes are, they're the Old Norse alphabet, but they're a lot more than that. Each of the runes represent a specific meaning, a specific thing, and when you combine them, they become what is known as bind runes, which are essentially combination runes, and those function as kind of similar to sigils, and they can mean a lot of things. So you basically bring the meaning of two together for a bigger meaning, and those can be turned into talismans. You can turn a lot of things into talismans. They're in the majority of older magical books. They're everywhere. But the symbols alone do have power to them. I'm not going to deny that the symbols alone have power, but you can make them have even more. And if you want a talisman, I'm assuming you want it to be intricate, you want it to work, you want it to be potent. So there's a sort of process you have to go through. Of course, this is going to vary a little bit tradition to tradition. Different traditions have different, rituals, essentially, right? They have different customs, different ways of doing it. But here's kind of the basic form. So the 101 way to make a talisman ready to carry is to go through the following process. First, you're going to want to purify. Before any ritual, you want to be ready. You want to be in the right headspace. And there are some systems with more extreme purification methods than others. For instance, there's this grimoire called the Abramelin that's very, very famous. I have a video on it, where essentially months and months of the ritual are devoted just to preparation and purification, right? There's a lot of time devoted to things like fasting, eating specific diets, wearing specific colors, doing all these restrictions in order to be pure enough to do the ritual. But purification can be a lot more simple than that. It can be wearing white, it can be fasting, it can be abstaining from sex temporarily. There are many, many ways to prepare, but you're gonna wanna prepare yourself as the ritualist. You're gonna wanna shower, you're gonna wanna wash your hands, you're gonna wanna, purify the air, do your cleansing, and make sure you're purified and ready to go. And then you're going to want to do that to your talisman. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna sit down, you're gonna make your talisman. There's a variety of ways you can make them. You can draw them on paper and then put them on a string. That's like the easy, like cheap way. You can also do it kind of scapular style where you sew a little patch and then you sew a string around it. Or if you want to go hard, you can make them in metal. You can essentially use any sort of metalworking technique to make it. I personally kind of struggle with this. It's not my skill, but there are many people who are really great at it. If you're unable to make them yourself, you can totally buy them. Like there's a lot of amazing creatives on Etsy who sell their talismans pre-made. Of course, it is always better to make your own tools, right? Like because when you make your own tools, you can make sure the correspondences are exactly what you like, right? Like you could, if you're making a solar talisman, pick gold as your metal instead of silver because that will correspond. But I mean, that's not accessible to everyone. Not everyone's going to be a metal worker. I remember I heard a joke forever ago about the grimoire tradition that you conjure all these spirits to teach you these skills like metalworking, artistry, all this stuff. But by the time you're even able to, you know, summon, evoke them, you've already learned the skills in developing the tools and techniques to even be able to conjure them, which I just found hilarious. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think that's kind of amazing and honestly pretty accurate. But if not, you can totally get them on Etsy. I know some local metaphysical stores will carry some. There's one in my city that has all the pentacles of Solomon on a string. I like to restring them because I hate a rope string. I find it annoying, but it is a very classic way to wear it. Anyways, now you've got it ready, you've purified it. What I would do for this is, you know, smoke cleanse it with water, do all the things and make it ready to be prepared. If you want to go really, really far, there are specific psalms that you can use, like protective stuff. You could do a prayer for protection over it, just to get it ready. And then you're gonna wanna do your ritual. So a lot of talismans, you're infusing with either a specific spirit, which in that case, you're gonna want to conjure that spirit, evoke, invoke, whatever it is you prefer. And then you're gonna want like the spirit to basically bless the talisman for you. Alternatively, you could do a ritual where you call up a spirit and then like have the talisman set just on a table so that it's sort of infused with that energy just by sort of being in that space. Or if you're someone who doesn't work with spirits, you could do it, you know, just manually, like do basically like a spell style thing with the talisman, you know, hold it over the candle, visualize your intentions, set your intentions, and then with that, you know, your talisman is set. Right? It's ready to go. It is, as many people call it, consecrated. Then you're going to want to start wearing it, using it, connecting it to your energy. There's this superstition about tarot that when you get a new tarot deck, you're supposed to sleep with it under your pillow for a month. I think that's way overkill. I think that's a little ridiculous, but I think that concept still has some value to it, right? Like when you make a new talisman, you're going to want to connect with it. You're going to want to, you know, engage with it and learn how it affects your life, right? You're going to want to use it. This raises a question of how often should I wear my talisman? Should it be something that I never take off, or should it be something that I only break out when I need it? And my answer to this is it depends on what that talisman is actually for. So some talismans you're gonna wanna wear all the time, right? Like with that scapular I mentioned earlier, that's something that you're never supposed to take off. As well, if you've ever met someone who has like one of those little cross necklaces and they're blessed by a priest, a lot of those people will never take that off because they believe constantly wearing it, you know, connects them to that energy constantly. For me, one of the rings I wear, this red one, is a thing that I consecrated for a very specific reason, and I have not taken it off once. Actually, I take it off to shower, but I've not taken it off long-term once since I actually did that ritual because this ring has a very specific purpose and I want to keep it on for that reason. As well, there are some talismans that you're gonna do the ritual with and you're gonna want to keep it on, but only for a set amount of time, right? Like let's say you're doing a ritual for a new career, right? You're doing ritual for a new career, you're using a talisman that represents the new opportunities, new job flow. Maybe it's a Jupiter talisman or a Mercury one. I go with either Jupiter or Mercury, maybe even the sun, depending on what you're going for. I find that you can work with different planetary energies for sort of the same thing, but the way that it happens and the way it expresses does tend to go differently depending on which planetary energy you're working with. This also applies for deities and other spirits, right? Like for a lot of different things, you're gonna notice that different spirits could theoretically get you that aim, but depending on who you're working with and what they represent and your relationship to that spirit, it's gonna actually play out a little bit differently, just depending. But anyways, back onto what I was saying. I'm very good at tangenting. I guess I inherit that from Crowley. So if you've ever tried to read a Crowley book, you're gonna notice that there are a million tangents, and it takes him about 9 years to get to the point. And oftentimes you'll open the chapter and the beginning of the chapter will completely be different than the end. And then you'll be like, this didn't even really talk about the chapter heading. Anyways, second tangent, I'm really doing good on tangenting today. Back to what I was saying, you'll wear it until that time is over, right? So if you're doing the new opportunity talisman, you will wear that from the time you consecrate a rituality and until you have the opportunities you want. And then you're gonna sort of let that talisman rest, set it down, put it back on your altar or, you know, in a ritual drawer or something. For me, I like to keep any talisman I'm like vaguely currently working with just on my altar, because I find that my altar is a place that I always am working at. It's facing the east in my apartment, and so it's something I always come back to. And I like having that space sort of represent all my active occult practices, all my active ritual work. Though, of course, that's a personal preference. There's no right or wrong way on that. But for me, I like to keep anything I'm currently working just on the altar to infuse it with the energy that I'm currently working with in my mystical practice. You take it off then. As well, there are other talismans that you're really gonna only want to use in specific circumstances. For me, this goes straight to the invisibility stuff. So whenever you hear the term invisibility in a grimoire, people are like, that's not real. And it's true. They do not make you literally invisible. That's not what they're for. But what invisibility means is that it makes you, you know, fly under the radar, be unnoticed. Like an invisibility talisman would be really great if you're, say, walking through a dangerous part of town as a young woman and you don't want to be accosted. Or if, you know, you're going into a really scary meeting where you think some people might be getting fired, and so you're like, don't notice me. Or maybe you have a presentation and you'd really rather go the next day instead of that day. That would be when you would use it. Or, you know, you're running into someone that you have a bad relationship with and you know they're gonna be there and you just don't want them to notice you, right? Or if you're on the train and the last thing you want is someone to talk to, right? That is when you use that as invisibility thing. But you can't wear that all the time, or you'll be invisible to things you want, because very few people really want to be invisible constantly, right? Like you want to have, you know, normal relationships, normal community, all these things. And so that would be a thing that you would put that on when you have specific things you want to happen, right? And then the rest of the time you would keep it away, keep it in your purse, keep it in your drawer, something like that, right? You don't want that constantly. So it depends on what you're using it for and, you know, how it was made, right? Certain things you're like, okay, this is blessed by a specific spirit, a specific person, so I want that around me constantly. And other things, it's like, I did that on my own. That's only when I need it. So there's no true answer on how often you should wear one. That's just up to you. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to talismans is that, you know, they're all cursed. Cursed talismans, this is the thing. This comes up on like, you know, horror Reddits all the time. Very few talismans are cursed because most talismans people make for themselves. It is true that you could say curse a talisman and then give it to someone, but I really don't think that commonly happens. It'd be incredibly petty. So when you're talking about talismans, rings, basically anything that's consecrated or enchanted, most of the time it's not that. So I wanted to say that somewhere in here. It's not a common worry, but it's one that I have seen people say, so yeah. But on giving people things, you can absolutely give someone a talisman, right? You don't have to use a talisman for yourself. Much like how a priest would bless a scapular, you can make a talisman and then give it to someone, right? You could give someone a gift. If you have a non-practitioner in your life who you think could use a little extra, you know, magic in their life, you can give them a talisman. Just please don't give them a cursed one. That's a little rude. So that's pretty much all I have to say about talismans. They're really not that hard to make. They're mini techniques. There's definitely something on your skill level that you could do. So don't worry about it, don't fret it, and make a talisman. You never know, they can be super helpful. I would totally, no matter who you are, try experimenting with them at least once because they can be really, really helpful. So thank you for watching. If you want more content, support me on Patreon. That's how I'm able to do all of this. Without Patreon, I would not have the free time to do this. And so your support really helps. If you join my Patreon, you get early access to all my videos, extra videos. You get ritual guides, which are basically like 20 pages of my writing every month with like direct instruction on how to do things. I'm thinking I may put a talisman thing in next month's because of this video. As well, you can meet with me if you're in the higher tiers and all sorts of cool stuff. If you want to find me, I'm on pretty much every social media platform. I don't know where I'm not. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Telegram. I'm new to Substack. I'm really liking Substack. I think that's cool. And TikTok, and Patreon, of course. I also host the podcast, The Postmodern Iconoclast, which does actually upload to this channel, so you can catch it here. It's also on some other podcasting platforms if that's how you prefer to listen, and that has a Patreon as well. That show is less instructional occult stuff, but actually commentaries on esoteric philosophy. Basically, it's about how esoteric philosophy intersects with the postmodern world, which is, you know, the world we're living in currently. So check that out. It's got a lot of guests and it's really cool. So thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. And if you're subscribed for 93 days, you will meet your holy guardian angel and you'll never need to know what a talisman is again. All right, goodbye.